Hello and welcome back to the second Red Star podcast. We are joined by a very special guest today. He is the godfather of American Rugby League. Started out as a humble podcast, went on to represent his heritage during the nines, and also perform on one of the biggest stages of all in the commentary position at the America's qualifiers. Mr. Rugby League in America, Nate Gladdin, how are you doing?
Well, first off, I've never been, that is the greatest introduction. Like, I feel very important right now, and I'm not. Let's review this real fast. Started a podcast. Yes. Didn't know what I was doing. Didn't even have a microphone to begin. Yes. Did get to go do the heritage. I got pretty much face planted by a gigantic Jamaican. Yes. Got to do I did get to do the commentary at the qualifier. So I did get to do that. So that is the only one, and like that I'll get to, I guess, check the box where I didn't get embarrassed or made fun of or anything else. But thanks for having me.
No, our pleasure, absolutely. So, for any of you hearing Nate for the first time, he of course runs the Rugby League in America podcast. If you've not checked it out before, I would highly recommend you do so after watching this one, of course, because we have got plenty to discuss here. So, I think we probably start right at the beginning. You mentioned that the podcast was merely an idea and you didn't even have a microphone.
Yeah, so when I started the podcast, I started last year. The first one came out in April, but I started like setting everything up in March last year, so 2018. And honestly, like I'd always wanted to be a part of it, but I didn't live close enough to be a part of a team. It just didn't work out. And I just couldn't seem to figure out how I could help. And then eventually I was like, you know what, somebody should be talking about the boys, and I like podcasts. Maybe I should do a podcast. And so I just decided to start the podcast. I thought maybe a couple guys in the league would listen to it. It was just to talk about them for a couple months a year, and then people actually started listening, and it was kind of crazy. So now I'm like 100,000 listens in. I'm kind of blown away, and I've been having so much fun, man. Like, so much fun. Yeah, that's crazy, and I didn't have a microphone. Like, I didn't have a microphone for the first like 4 or 5 episodes. I was just talking into my laptop, and that was it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you like very first hit the radar, because there was like a little bit of a crossover between myself and you.
Yeah.
In regards to what we were doing, so this is pre-Red Star. In fact, this is how far back we're going now. We're going early 2018.
Yep.
I'm still with RLATG. We've picked up the Jamaica sponsorship, and then we get chatting, start talking, start spitballing a few ideas, and then I think I was there early. I think I was like number 17.
Yeah, you were super early on as a guest, like really early on. It was early.
And you know what? Like, you've got well over 100 now. I think last time I checked, like 170 plus in it.
It's. I'd have to look. It's 100 and something. It's a lot. Well, yeah. When you total up, because I do like a wrap up show for the local league, but it's crazy how many. There are a lot of them. I kind of look up one day and I was like, oh wow, like I actually did like 100 of those. That's crazy. Like it's nuts how fast they're flowing right through.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Podcasts are so fun to do as well.
Because
when you get someone and you get a little bit of chemistry going, it's just a conversation. That's all it is. It's a conversation that other people are going to listen to. So you got to be super careful what you do say, but you've also got to enjoy it.
That's it. You just that's why I tell everybody, and it comes with time too. Like, for instance, like when I first started this, like when we were talking, I was still learning, like, to make sure I'm getting like the proper everything, proper mic levels and stuff like that. And I'm still learning, but even then I'd never done interviews, right? So I didn't really know how to interview. And then eventually one day I was like, why am I interviewing? Why am I not just talking and just having fun? And then eventually I swapped over, and now I am technically interviewing people, but I just kind of get lost. Like, I'll have a list of questions and I'll ask two, and the rest of it will just be based on whatever they want to talk about. We just have fun, and it's just great.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's gauging your audience, really, and I mean, some people like that very structured. Here's what we're going to talk about. Is there anything you want to slot in between? And then there's other people that are just like, hey, let's just wing it and have fun.
That's me. That's totally me. I have guests that'll ask to be like, hey, so what are all the questions you're asking me? I'm like, you know what? I don't even know what all the questions I'm going to ask you are. Like, I'm just winging this, man. And I know they're just like, oh God, this idiot. But I don't know what to do. Like, it's just, I can have a whole bunch of questions, but man, I don't like. I'm gonna do an Instagram live after this, and I've got like a list of like 7 topics I want to talk about. I'll probably talk about 2, and that's it. Like, there's no telling.
So, I mean, obviously, as an American, rugby league is not kind of an ingrained sport over there yet. So, how was it that it managed to get its hooks into you so fast, and what was your first experience with it?
Well, so it's funny, like. My first experience was over in the Middle East. So I was actually over there, was serving in the military, doing like a joint force style thing. So there was Australians, and there were, people from New Zealand and people from England and people from all over. And there were more Aussies than Kiwis and Englishmen in that group that they were rugby league people, so they wanted to play, rugby league rules. Well, I'd seen a guy with a Broncos shirt on in the chow hall, and I was like, oh, what is that? Like, it looked like the exact same logo as the high school I grew up in here in America. So I just asked him, and we started talking. He let me come out. I tossed the ball around, and because I'd played scrum half in rugby union, they were like, oh, well, you can pass the ball, so how about you pretty much be like the all-time hooker? And I would just run around. And so for the most part, I would just run around and pass the ball so they could play, and it just kept play flowing. But I didn't even know what I was really playing because they kept saying footy. So whenever I got home, I kept looking up I kept trying to find like footy, and at first it was Australian rules football kept coming up, and I was like, that wasn't what I was playing. Like, I didn't even know what I was like. I didn't even know. And because I was just thinking rugby, and they were like, oh yeah, so you've played footy then. And so in my mind, it was like footy was football, which is soccer, or something. I was like, this is like rugby. It's a rugby ball, but I was like, I don't know. And then eventually I figured it out, and then I just started watching YouTube clips, and but never really got to see it. Like it wasn't right around where I was at. So for the most part, I was watching it from afar.
Yeah, that's got to be real tough. Especially there's not a lot of live streaming as well, so. I mean, it's about getting to as many games as you can, because once you're hooked on it, you are properly hooked on it.
Oh my God, yeah, it's so true. And I was bummed this weekend. I had to do some work, so I couldn't get out and go to the game this weekend in the semifinals. But in a couple of weeks, and 2 weekends from now, on the 24th, I'm so excited. I'll be in Brooklyn to watch the Brooklyn Kings and the Jacksonville Axemen and do the commentary for the USARL Grand Final, and I'm really excited for that.
That's the thing, like, you've come into so many cool experiences just through putting yourself out there. I remember, like, I think it was like the first or second time that we spoke, you said, like, you've not always got to know what you're doing. It's just about going out there and trying to make a difference. And you did that with things like the shirt as well. So when you released the podcast shirt, everybody was like, oh, just merchandise. Okay, we got another guy trying to make a celebrity of himself. And then all of a sudden you drop that big one, and you come in and you're like, but all proceeds are going into the USARL. And that's what, then people were like, okay, what are we dealing with here?
Yeah, people were kind of like, I did actually have people reach out and ask me, like, what's my angle? And I'm like, what do you mean, what's my angle? And they're like, well, how are you making money? I'm like, I'm not. Like, I worked it out. They were really, like, Paladin was really nice, and they basically said they'll do it at cost. So, like, they were willing to do that, and I was willing to work with them. So, I mean, was it a $2 shirt? No, it was like, I think it was like $40, but it was all going to the team. They were willing to basically take, for lack of a better term, they were willing to take a loss, and allow all that proceed to go to them. And it wasn't like we raised like millions of dollars, but I think we raised, I want to say, I'd have to look back at it again, but I want to say it was like $2,400 or something that was raised towards going to the national team. And our boys have to fund their entire way there, And so because of that, it was I don't know, I thought it was a cool thing to do. And so I'm thinking about doing it again. I haven't released any of the other shirts, and excuse me, sorry about that. Yeah, to be perfectly honest, Paladin's now pulled them down, right? Because I was like, I may do some other version of something. So I may release again. I'm really debating on whether I want to do another one or not, because I just don't know that I want to deal with all the headaches of it. But I'm thinking about doing another one because we've got the game coming up in November and doing like a redesign, a different style, and doing another release and doing the same thing. Try to raise money for the national team, because it's just, I don't know, every little bit, in my mind, everything helps. Even if it's a couple $1,000s, that's a couple $1,000s towards hotel rooms, or, or airline travel, or gas money, or I don't know, food money, something like it. But it's a couple $1,000s, and it doesn't. I don't have to do anything other than just tell everybody to please buy it.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I don't think people realize just how difficult it is to merchandise. It is so hard. You've got to come up with a design. You've got to then get the sizings right. You've got to make sure that then your supplier can ship. Then you've got to then, if they're not going to ship direct to the houses, you've got to then ship direct yourself. And then you've got to work all that into your costings. I mean, when we ran the Challenge Cup jersey, so the blue one with the names on it,
yeah,
that was, one, absolutely loved the jersey. Two, logistical nightmare.
Oh God.
I think we finished it up with something like we had little over 200 names on that jersey, and
yeah, mine's one of them.
And our biggest fear was, what if we get somebody that puts down for a jersey and then pays for a jersey and we accidentally miss their name off. And that gave us sleepless nights for the longest. We were constantly back and forth with the supplier. We were like, show us the shirt. We're going through the lists constantly, just skimming over, making sure we got everybody on there. like merchandising is not for the faint of heart.
It's not. And I got to be honest, it's funny. Like, after doing it, I hate it. Like after doing it, I'm just like, man, this sucks. Like, doing stuff with the national team now, and I've had companies call, and they continue to call, and I'm continuing to work with them, and I've said, look, I'm going to talk to everybody that I can to find out the best thing for us, but it's a matter of little things. I'm like, hey, send me samples, okay, and it's a couple months, and I'm still waiting on samples from certain companies, and like, for me, I just mark them off the list, because it's headache after headache after headache, and I'm just like, man, you know what, I would hate to be in that line of work. Like, it would be so, like, anybody who is, like, kudos to them that constantly do it, because, man, I tell you what, like, that's just a headache, and I only dealt with it a little bit.
Oh yeah, and then there's the other one, sponsorship. Sponsorship's always the other fun one. Because, like, especially like with your role in the USARL now, you'll know that when you're trying to speak to prospective sort of investors, people that you think, you know what, this is going really well, I think that this company might sign with us, and then all of a sudden the communications go completely dark.
Yeah,
and you're
they
like,
really do.
Yeah, it's like, as soon as somebody figures out they don't want to work with you, it's like they don't want to know you ever existed.
I know, it's crazy. It's funny because we're just now to the point. So I've got a couple companies that I've got to have conversations with over the next couple of weeks. But we've kind of gone away from. I had a couple that I was talking to, but I couldn't really do anything because we weren't yet decided whether we were in the World Cup or not. Now that we're not, I have a completely different angle to basically talk to teams. So instead of, oh, well, you're going to the World Cup, it's, okay, we're building towards 2025. So our qualifiers in 2022. So now I've got to recalibrate that and then let them know, like, hey, if you come on board with us, you're going to come on board and you're going to be on our jerseys and you're going to be on our brand as we build through 2022. But it's a completely different sell that I have to give now. So it's, so I have to, and I'm trying to be intelligent, like, oh, well, where are you trying to learn to sell? Or, talking to companies, like, are you trying to get to Australia? Are you trying to get to England? Like, this could help. Like, trying to do all those little things to try to hopefully make the bigger picture, make it work. So it's a headache.
Yeah. So if you just like to explain for those people that don't know, obviously you've taken up quite an important role in the development of the women's game in America as well as the wheelchair game as well.
Yeah, so basically I got tricked. So I need to stop doing the podcast. If I'm completely honest, I need to quit the podcast, because here's what happened. So on a positive note, I actually met my girlfriend through the podcast. I interviewed her. On another positive note, but another tricky moment is I did an interview with Steve Williams, who's one of the board members and media director for the USARL, and I said something about when are we going to get women's, and he made a mention of talking to somebody, and I talked to them, and then they were like, "Oh, you want to help?" And I was like, "Sure, I'll be the manager." I thought it'd be cool to be the manager, and then at the last second they were like, "Yeah, no, I don't have time to do this. Let's put it up." And then the board voted and said yes to me being the director, and I was like, "That's really cool." And then I woke up like 3 days later, and I was like, I'm now the director. Like, I'm not just talking on a podcast. So I tell you what, man, it's just ridiculous. And then I was talking to him about the wheelchair. I got to get in the wheelchair and like they convinced me. I come down, I go down and to do the USA Rugby League wheelchair stuff and be at that first event. It was really cool. Actually, of all the things I've had the opportunity to cover and commentate on, that is the thing by far, without a doubt, that has left the biggest impact on me. But partially because it's amazing, the athletes and the inclusion, but also because I got in the wheelchair and I was like, I can roll a wheelchair. I can roll a wheelchair, but I can't roll it as fast or as good. Like, I ran into the bleachers. I couldn't catch anybody. Eventually they were like, "Oh, let's get ready to play." I was like, I'm just going to commentate. Somebody else play. So I actually got out of the chair and just commentated so I didn't look like a complete idiot because I sucked.
That's the thing. So, I mean, obviously the nines have been announced, and obviously disappointing that they're not going to be there as well. And the Women's World Cup as well. All the teams announced, and people. One of the things that really struck me is people. I think they've upped it to 8 teams, if I'm not wrong.
Correct.
I think 8 teams, and you got 14 ranked teams in the world. And I think just because Serbia's now just joined as well, and people are like, "Why have we only got 8?" Like, well, look back to 2017. We only had what, 4?
4. Yeah, exactly.
4, 5. Like, if we were growing the game at a rate of ×2 every time we hit a World Cup, that'd be fantastic. I'd take that every single day.
Every time. To me, I mean, yeah, I want to be in, obviously, but for us, to be completely honest, I have no issue with them leaving us out because of the fact that, well, we weren't even in existence 6 months before that. And so now we have a different timeline. So it's funny because I care about the national team and I want to build a national team. But I'm having conversations with people in the Carolinas and California and next week Chicago to try to set up local regionals. And I'm basically going to start looking at them as well as Hawaii. And I'm basically going to say, okay, who's willing to put in the work to try to develop a local domestic comp? And I see some real options. And so one of the things I'm going to look at, like, for instance, with California, is if I can get 2 colleges, to basically go in on letting some of the individuals that live out there come in and train and say, hey, we'd like to put on this event next fall. So obviously, or fall, obviously here on the Northern Hemisphere. So, but next, say October, that gives us a year to basically get it off the ground. But if I can get 2 college teams to buy in on playing a game in 2020, and I can also get Hawaii, which is going to put on an exhibition game late this year, still working on the details, but they're going to put on a game just amongst themselves and play league rules. And then I can get another one, on the East Coast. If I can get a couple of these going in 2020, then by 2021, it's turning around and try to make a focal point of, okay, this is where our money and funding will go into. And if one of those regions really dedicates themselves, well, then that's where we'll build our national team out of, and we'll start focusing our national team training camps out of there and different things. And at the same time, we're going to look at a pipeline to Australia. And we've set that up. I've gone over in West Mitchelton. I've worked it out with them that they're going to host our training camps for our national team, and then West Brisbane as well will kind of be connected in there. So that's a pipeline to the NRLW. I don't expect our girls to make it there right now, but it shows a pipeline, which means when I start talking to these girls in this local region, it's, hey, why don't we build this domestic comp? And oh, by the way, here's a chance for you to go live in Australia for a couple months or for a year. And have this chance to go play at this level, and it's just showing these pathways. So it's giving them a pathway to a national team and trying to give them a pathway to the highest levels. As far as professional goes, there's only a couple places around the world, and so if we can give them those, then it's huge. I'd love to do the same thing, obviously, in England as well, because then I can go to those colleges and say, hey, you add this to your sports, and when you do that, then this is where your girls can go, and it gives them another avenue for them to recruit. So that's kind of so us not getting in the World Cup, that's a long way to say us not getting in the World Cup. It kind of actually allows us to do it the proper way and kind of build slowly and with a good root system.
Yeah, I mean, when you take out like the initial sting and you sit and think about it logically, you're like, you know what, this is a bit of a blessing in disguise, because for me to get the best team together, get training camps set up, source funding for it, get sponsorships, logistics, all that stuff set up, like it's not a time frame that you can play to right now. It's so difficult to nail all that down to a fine tee, especially for something as big as a World Cup.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. And it also means I don't have to come up with as much funding as quick. If I'm going to have a regional camp, here's a regional camp. It's going to cost X amount of thousands of dollars, and it's going to not be near as much because I can just build in and recruit one specific area. Takes down travel costs. It's all local players from colleges and high schools that play rugby and play, soccer and all the other ones. And now I can just focus on that. So now I've got to pay for coaches and I got to pay for fields and equipment. It's a little bit lower bill, and the good thing about that is it's training for me, right? It's practice for me as a director to make sure that logistically we're doing everything properly. And that we're being financially sustainable or becoming financially sustainable. I'll be completely honest and I've told a couple people this, and of course some of them laugh, and I like that they laugh. Actually, I prefer the people that laugh at me than the people that agree with me, just because that means I'm on the right track. But my honest goal is by 2026, the year after the World Cup, we're building a domestic league where we can actually pay as much money as anybody anywhere in the world is paying women to play rugby league. And the other side of that is to be able to have the first ever, our domestic league isn't paid for. Our players they don't play, like our men, they don't play for pay. They play for fun. And if it stays like that, and obviously it's unbelievably admirable, and I love that, eventually maybe there'll be professional clubs as well. But the way I look at it is, how great would it be if we could be the first country to ever say that they've paid their women before they've paid their men. So that's a personal goal of mine. So 2026 is kind of my benchmark year to go, okay, this is what we're looking for. So
yeah, 100%, and it's an incredible admirable standpoint. I mean, we're in a very similar scenario over at Red Star with our girls. So I mean, there's technically two women's teams in Serbia, but they both belong to Red Star. So you obviously have the Red Star girls, and then you have the reserves, or Crveni Kengur. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the time they just end up playing each other, or they have to go, and we are talking across Europe for a game. The last time that the girls played a 13-a-side game was when we went to Greece to play Aris. They played two games. I mean, to go from Serbia to Greece just to get a game, that's mad.
Oh God, yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think people understand. And I'm glad that most people don't have to think about this. But a perfect example is, if you're, I say this to people all the time, is even on the men's side, most places in England and most places in Australia and New Zealand, especially those places, and even Serbia, like they have local teams that may not be that far down the road. Most of our men's teams are traveling 4 hours to play a local game. Like there's the clubs in New York City are close together, and the club down in the South, Lakeland and Tampa, they're an hour apart. Other than that, everybody's traveling guaranteed a minimum of 2 hours to play a local game. Like that's it's an expansive country, and it's tough. And then when you look at women, same thing. And you guys over in Serbia, same thing. I mean, to develop that, it's the short term pains for the long term gains. But I love what you guys are doing over there. Like there's a great model. Like, what Serbia is doing with Red Star, just in general, like the Balkan Super League, and like you said, Red Star and specifically, and this, Serbia, all of it, that is a great model to show development, right? And so even though it's like a lot of it is men, for me, I can look at it from a women's standpoint and go, okay, how'd they do this? They built in here, and then from there they built in, and then like my piece of the whole like Balkan Super League is to go, well, there's Canada, and they've got the western part of Canada, and it's so far away from the eastern part. Maybe we could develop like a rivalry between there. Maybe we could have an origin style game between Canada and America based on the West Coast. So you guys give us a lot of that, something to look at.
Yeah, there's a lot of different angles you can run, and one of the big advantages that we have is we don't have to compete with rugby union. Like rugby union will be forever rugby league's biggest foe, and I mean in America where you've got so many different sports as well, everybody's looking at the NFL. First of all, college football is huge. If there's people out there that are yet to see a game of college football, I urge you to go watch it. You have never seen so many people turn out to watch unsigned players play each other. Like,
it's unreal.
20, 30,000 easy.
It is unbelievable. So like I'm a fan of the Michigan Wolverines, and I love them. You're talking 110,000 people at a game every weekend. Every weekend that they're at home, 110,000 people in the stands cheering on the Big Blue, singing "Hail to our alma mater" kind of thing. Like it's just "Hail to the victors valiant," like just over and over, like singing, and the band's playing, and people are walking down Main Street, and it's a beautiful place. But it's an event, right? Or here's a great example. Somebody should go look up on YouTube. I don't even know what it's called. You could look up Virginia Tech, Enter the Sandman, and you could see like what it's like when they come into their stadium. Or you could look up Clemson football, Clemson Tigers entry or something like that, and you'll see like what it's like when those teams enter and how loud those stadiums get and how crazy they get. I have been to I've been to a game at LSU, so Louisiana State University. It's the LSU Tigers. When they play a home game, this is actually real. You can look this up. When they play their home games, their stadium actually registers as an earthquake on the Richter scale because of the amount of volume of coming out of their stadium. That's not a joke. Like you can look that up. Like they actually have registered on the Richter scale. It is the loudest place I've ever been on earth in a sporting event. It is out of this world.
That is just unreal.
It's maddening. It's amazing.
But that's the thing, like, there's so many things that American football in particular does so well. So a lot of people think that things like capitalism in rugby league is a big go forward, which, I mean, if you're a club that's got higher aspirations than anybody else, you kind of need that money to pull in. But they opt into, have you heard of collective bargaining?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they go straight down that route. So for anybody unfamiliar with collective bargaining, it's essentially every club opts in together for their things like merchandise packages and even sometimes ticket sales. And what will happen is any money that's raised is then split across the competition. So if you have a weak link in there, so say for example you get a team that sells less merchandise, less tickets, then they basically don't suffer. They've got a platform to then build themselves up off. So rather than penalising teams that aren't doing so well, you give them that little bit of a boost just by levelling the league off.
Yeah, and it's huge. And one of the other things, because it's funny, because I've told people that, and they're like, well, that's not. They're like, well, that's great, but that doesn't give that team any incentive to try, and it's not. And I'm like, you're right. It's not fair for that team to always get away with that. However, there's also a minimum. There's also a minimum amount of the salary cap they have to spend. There's also a minimum amount that they have to be able to produce in ticket sales and certain things. So there are minimums, and if they don't reach those minimums, they will pay a penalty. Period. So inside of that, it's like, you will get to this. So it's not laid against them right at the beginning, but it's basically like, okay, within 5 years, you will be here. Within this amount of years, you will be here. With that, like, if you're in a small market, we don't expect you to make that, but it's built on a ratio, right? So like, if you're in a good example is like the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs have an unreal fan base, but but Kansas City itself is not big, and it's in a pretty rural, like Missouri's not a massively populated state, but Kansas, I've been to Kansas City. It's not gigantic, but they pack out their stadium because they do such a great job of like focusing on their brand. But when you look at them against, say, the New York Giants or the Dallas Cowboys or somebody like that, the New England Patriots, they don't come from as big of a region, so they can't produce the same amount of money, but they produce the same percentage of quality and things like that. And so that's how the collective bargaining works. Is they look at it and they go, okay, they do get a certain amount of money, but they have to produce, and they do, and that's their job to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about brand. I mean, we've got a huge brand to play. So, in terms of Red Star, everybody immediately, as soon as they hear Red Star, thinks of the football team, which, in a way, can be really frustrating because you're like, hey, we're a rugby league team and we exist too. But in another way, you're like, oh yeah, you've heard of them. Well, did you know they also have a rugby league team and a handball team and all these other teams too? And it gives people that little bit of intrigue. And I mean, especially when it came to the Challenge Cup, like I don't know how many people. Well, we got the viewing figures, and I think it was something like, so it was one of the highest watched, one of the most watched and most viewed round one games ever televised.
Wow.
The attendance was. We spoke to the Millham chairman. He said that it was 2,800 through the gate.
That's awesome.
You honestly, there was no way from the pitch to the changing rooms. So the changing rooms were kind of off to the right hand side a little bit, out through the very bottom left of the field, as if you're running down it. And they had to warn fans that it was coming up to half time so that they could make a gap for people to get through.
That's unbelievable.
And it's all because we have that brand that we can play with, and that Serbian heritage as well. We had so many Serbs that travelled for that game alone. I mean, out of the 2,800 that were up there, I mean, I think literally everyone in Millham was at that game. But then we had huge amounts of support because obviously you play to that Serbian heritage. You let people know that this isn't just one club making this step. This is a whole country that's pulling together, and that came up straight away. That was one of the biggest things. People having that pride and taking that ownership and saying, this is my club, this is my heritage.
It's huge. Like, that's such a big thing. I think it's really important. I look at places around the United States, and if you go to New York, you'll go to perfect example. If you go up to like the Bronx and the Yonkers and White Plains, those regions, you can go through a neighborhood and you'll see Italian flags everywhere, and then turn the corner and you'll see Portuguese flags, and then turn the corner and you'll see Russian flags, and all sectored off by those neighborhoods. And you think about that, like if you said that, if you said Red Star was I'm trying to, let's say Aris Eagles, right? So let's say Red Star and Aris were coming to America and they were playing in New York City, and they were playing a game there, and they started telling people that it was Serbia versus Italy. There would be so many people that would come and watch it. They would have no idea what rugby league was, but they would come because of that, right? And that heritage and that pride and that matters. I can't tell how many people reached out to me. They were like, "Oh no, I'm a Milan fan." Or like a perfect example is Peter Lupton. He's a Welsh international. He plays with the Boston 13s. But Milan was his actual youth club. That's the club he grew up in. He was so proud to see his team playing, and he was so excited about that. And it was, for him, it was great. So and that was all the way from Boston. So I mean, what you guys did on that day, I tuned in. I was in Reno, Nevada, and had to wake up at, I don't even know. I want to say it was like, I may be wrong on this. I feel like it was like 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning or something, and brought up the laptop and watched the game from there. And it was great. Like, it was so much fun to watch.
Yeah, it was. In all honesty, it's the one game I can't bring myself back to watch. It's the one game that I've never watched a rerun of.
Oh, really?
Just because of the day itself. Because that's the thing. Like, there was so much hype. There was so much, the BBC were all over us. The RFL were like, hey, even like so. One of the guys was like on Sky Sports the morning of the game itself, and we were like front page of Sky Sports, and they were taking betting odds, and they had us on like stuff in terms of handicaps. So, a handicap's obviously when a team starts on plus or minus, and they have to win by that greater margin. So they had us on a -22. And we're like, wow. People were like, we don't even know how we're going to do, and like people at Sky Sports are tipping us to beat Milan by 22 points, and they were like, I mean, all those things became in hindsight, all those things became a huge distraction, but in terms of the experience, Milan is that weekend with the boys is something that I will never forget, and I think probably my favourite thing was the junior training camp that we set up.
Yeah.
And like the boys were so good for it. I mean, to put it into perspective, they'd set off travelling on the Friday morning. They took a coach to Hungary, flew into Sheffield. They'd landed by about 7 or 8 p.m. From there, then straight onto a coach and up to Milan. For anybody that doesn't know where Milan is, it's literally one of the furthest most northern points of England, like out in the I think it's the lakes, I'm not sure, but it's like it was 4.5 to 5 hours to get there. So the guys get there, we get there 1 a.m. Then we got to sort all the rooms out, figure out who's going where. We're off to bed, and then we know that we've got to be up the next morning because we'd made a promise to the guys over at Milan that we'd come and we'd do a junior training camp. So we held open training for ages of 5 to 12, I think it was. It might have even been 5 to 14, and split them off into groups of like various ages and abilities. And the guys were great, just taking them through plays, putting drills on, and then afterwards taking the time to sign stuff for people as well. And that was so well received, and because of taking that time to do those things, it built up a really good affinity, and it wasn't this storyline anymore of like new kids on the block versus the oldest amateur team in the world. It was two teams with a remarkable partnership going head to head in a game that nobody knows which way it's going to go.
Yeah, it was just following the coverage on social media was amazing. Following everything that you guys were doing was amazing there, and then to see like how the game was played out and everything else, it was just fantastic. And obviously it didn't go the way you wanted it at the end, but it was fun. I mean, so many people were watching, and so many people wanted to be a part of it. Like, I mean, I did. Like, I bought a jersey. It was such a cool event. It was so incredible. And it's like those kind of things. Like, I can't wait to be involved in some kind of a tour, something like that, where I can say that I was a part of a memorable moment like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's unreal. I mean, like we said, I mean, the BBC gave us the figures, and it was upwards of 45,000 that watched that game live.
That's unreal. That is unreal.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And like, people were... there was two responses that we expected after the game, because obviously you get people that are pure traditionalists, so they'll be like, you know what, we want the game in Cumbria, and we're not bothered about Toronto, Ottawa, New York or Red Star. We're not bothered about that. We want the game to grow again where it was. And then you get the people that are like, hey, this is exciting and new, I want to see where this goes. So we were dreading the next day. We were like, I just know it's going to be people like, oh look, Red Star, oh look at this. Everybody hyped them up, and then they get the backsides handed to them. I was like, I don't want to check social media. And then I plucked up the courage and had a look on some of the forums, and like the outpouring of respect. People were like, you know what, they came, they made the trip, respect to them. And we're like, this is how we know that we've made a good decision. Because we came to earn the respect of people, and we came to, give a game. And you know what, we may not have given the best account of ourselves on the day, but there wasn't a single player on that field that didn't give 100%.
That's right. And that's all you can ask for. Like, you always want to win, of course. Like, it's a sport, like, it's competitive. But what it comes down to at the very end, it's all about it's all about just competing and like doing your brand proud, and you know, and your followers proud, and that's what you did, and that's all you can ask for.
Yeah, I mean, we had two American internationals in the squad as well, in Brandon Anderson and Jamil Robinson as well.
Yeah.
Now they're back stateside
Yep,
doing their thing.
they're actually getting ready to compete in this grand final in a couple weeks. They came off the big win. They had a big win, 54-0 over Boston this weekend yesterday, and now in a couple weeks they'll be part of the team that's running out there. You know, and both of these teams, like, this is actually a really good credit. Like, you know, both of these teams have guys that have good quality to them. You know, Jacksonville and Brooklyn. But it's funny, like, when people say, "Oh, well, you know, what's these guys' background?" Well, we can say that we've got a couple of guys like on Brooklyn, for instance. You know, a couple of guys that are national team players, domestic national team players for both sides. But at the same time in that, we can say we've had guys that have played rugby league in Australia, played rugby league in England with Ryan Burrows, and we can say that we've had guys that have played in Serbia with Brandon and Jamil, and they've also played in the Challenge Cup. Like, it's really cool to say you have individuals from our country, where it wasn't that many years ago you couldn't have said that at all about the United States. So it continues, as the game continues to grow everywhere, we get to be a part of that, and I think that's really cool. And Serbia does too. And like, how great is that? Like, right now we're talking through technology from, you know, you're in England, I'm in America. We're talking about Serbia, and we've mentioned Aris, and we mentioned Milam, and places that have a history in the game, new and old, and it's just incredible.
Yeah, and that's what the game's becoming now. It's about joining it up in between. I mean, a lot of people, Toronto, for their sins, there's a lot of people that are still very sceptical over Toronto, but I think people will be more receptive to Ottawa, just simply because Ottawa have said, like, hey, we don't technically have Super League ambitions right now. What we want is a Canadian domestic team that's going to act as a feeder for every amateur team in there. And I think people are like, hey, you know what? I like that.
Yeah, 100%. I guess, and there's, you know, I tell everybody, it's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it, as long as you're doing it with integrity and you're not hurting the game and you're building it. But I kind of love the fascination of what Toronto kind of going big, Ottawa trying to go small and local, New York trying to come in as well, and trying to be a little bit of, I think they're going to try to be a little bit of both. Like, they're going to try to get integrated into the local domestic comp, but at the same time try to, like, you know, obviously buy some players that help them move forward. With them being in New York, they kind of don't have a choice. They can't stay down at the lower levels for long and anybody pay attention to them in New York City. They have to move. They have to get the championship. As long as they get the championship, then they'll be okay. But they're kind of a mix. But I'm so interested in the fact that there's three teams with three different approaches, all here, you know, in North America, and they're all part of the game going forward. Like, and they're part of, like, the oldest competition in the world. I mean, like, it's incredible.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Ottawa played it smart as well, just simply because they bought a league license.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're a new team setting up from scratch, I mean, Toronto was in the works. I think they said something like 2 years before they even told anybody that it was going on. Just simply because it's so difficult to put a case together. You've got to have people come out, check everything. You've got to have all your investors vetted, all your accounts, due diligence, all that stuff. Whereas when you buy a license, it's like, right, okay, you already have the rights to a club. We now just need a business plan from you. And it's a shame that their business plans, unfortunately, come up short for the year and they're not going to make 2020. But it's still exciting that there are teams in major cities, and it's going to be a huge sell point.
It's massive.
I mean, how long before we have a major Spanish team pitch up in Barcelona? Obviously, you've got Catalans with the Barcelona connection, and they've already used the new camp. But, I mean, how long is it before teams start setting up in major cities? And Rugby League has now got a model similar to almost like Super Rugby, because people are like, oh, this won't work. And I'm like, well, do you know what? Rugby Union's doing okay for itself.
That's right.
And they've got teams in South Africa, and Australia, and New Zealand all playing each other. So, I think we'll be okay
It
for
can
the moment.
absolutely
Man.
work, it can absolutely work. And I look at it and I think, let's say they're, fast forward 10 years from now, if Red Star Belgrade is one of those teams, because you guys are in such a unique position where you can enter into this, enter into so many different varieties and versions of how you build. And it's kind of really cool being an outsider in the sense of like kind of the new kid on the block, because you can kind of do it your own way. And that's pretty amazing. But you think about it, like there could be three or four teams in North America. There could be a Spanish team, a Serbian team, a couple French teams, English teams. Who knows? Maybe by then an Irish team or something like that. But there's all these different places. I mean, we're talking. We may have a Challenge Cup. Fast forward 10 years from now, that is truly North Hemisphere, like an entire North Hemisphere, really, that plays the game. Like it could be something special.
Yeah, like football has the Champions League, so you take the elite from every division. You know what? It'll take a long time for teams to catch up, just because like England's got what, like 150-year head start. But you know what? The process of watching those smaller teams battle it out will be incredible, and I think people enjoy that aspect because a lot of people become very frustrated with the NRL and Super League because everything's very technical, very polished. It's like, hey, look, 5 set plays, we either score or we kick.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas people like the very off the cuff style because players are still quite raw, it's like, hey, look, a ball's gone to ground, right? Okay, what is going to happen next?
Yeah.
You know that someone's not going to come in, sweep it up with one arm, spin 3 players, and go over for a try. It's like this could end up anywhere.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's going to be the fascinating piece of it. It's going to, the other thing too that happens. Let's say these all grow, and this continues to go that way. Every country will have its own style, which means, and inside of that, like the way that Toronto plays will be their own way. The way Ottawa plays, the way England and Serbia and all that. But there are some places like, in order for New York to be successful, they will have to have a flashy style. They will have to have an exciting offensive style. Like they got to be good in defense, and they say defense wins championships. That's great, but offense sells tickets. And for New York, that is the style. Like it's a fast pace. So they will have to bring that to the competition. So when you look at that, like as you go forward, like a Toronto and all those different teams will have their own way, but New York will have they'll have to have a very offensive way, which means, after that fifth one, it's not a guaranteed kick. It's a keep the ball alive as absolute much as you possibly can and see what you get, or send the fastest guy playing in all of rugby league down the wing and see if he can get underneath it. Like there'll have to be that, so it'll take on its own culture. And Spain would do the same thing, Serbia same thing, so where they can play and they can be technical, but there will be a certain flavor of where they're from, and that could be something special.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's literally just getting word out there. If you watch videos of how excited NFL fans get when someone laterals a ball,
Oh
like
God, yeah.
people are like, "Oh my god, he's not the quarterback and he's passed the ball. Oh my god, what's going to happen next?" Like that's literally a game of rugby. What you're watching right now is a miniature game of rugby. Like if people understand that, there was I think it was like maybe about a year ago there was a huge viral trend of like American watches sport that's not very like that's not sort of indigenous to their culture. So you'd have Americans watching AFL and Americans watching rugby league, and like they were like, so let me get this straight. You can hit a guy as hard as you want, and there is no protection other than this thing that goes over your teeth. And I was like, correct. And I'm like, these people are psychopaths, and I love it.
Yeah, we love that. We love it. Like we're Americans, and we love, for better or for worse. We do like a lot of brash in your face when it comes to sport. We like that. Like it's like, yeah, there's a big push, for CTE and different things, and yes, and so, like soccer's growing here in America and things like that. But when it comes down to it, it's like America still loves a good hard hit. Like they still love. That's why football became so big. That's why UFC has blown up in America. It's like there's obviously basketball is big in America, and part of that is like because basketball does such a great job with social media and the culture of it and stuff like that. But baseball is the slowest. Like, baseball is a perfect example of what can happen to rugby league if you're not careful. Baseball refuses to change its traditions, and because it does, it continues to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle on popularity, and just nobody really cares anymore. Just baseball is becoming an irrelevant sport in America because it's not setting itself up to grow. And that's, but football is massive. And like we said, Jesus, there's college football games where it actually registers as an earthquake when they cheer. Like, that's insane. And that's what rugby league can be. It can actually be like that because it has that element of just wide open play mixed with hard hitting action. And that's so exciting.
Oh yeah, undoubtedly. I mean, when you look at things like State of Origin, like the amount of the guys take it up another level.
Yes.
Like, if the first game of rugby league you ever watched was like State of Origin 2, you'd be hooked on it immediately, because that is always undoubtedly an incredible game just because of how much is riding on it. You got one team trying to close out a series, one team trying to claw it back, and like the pace of the game, like they go through the stats and they're like, this game's moving faster than any other game before it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, obviously, I backed Queensland, so Game 3 was a complete freaking bummer for me how it ended. And I had to sit here in my living room and listen to my girlfriend, who's from New South Wales, scream at the top of her lungs when they won. Anyways, I was beside myself. But that said, though, if you saw that game, I turned that game on at work. I went to work and I was just bummed, but I turned that game on a couple weeks ago and let that play through. And I was like, guys, just watch us all the way to the end. And I let that play all the way through. They have no clue who James Tedesco is whatsoever. They have no idea that he plays for the Sydney Roosters. They have never heard of the Sydney Roosters. Actually, I say that a couple of the guys have, because some of the guys I work with have been to Sydney Roosters games, but they have no idea who James Tedesco is. That said, they now know who the Blues are, and they know James Tedesco scored the greatest try ever in the history of rugby league. And in their mind, because that's the only one they've ever seen, that will always go down as the best one ever. That will always go down as, and for me, my first State of Origin game that I ever saw was whenever I got back and I started watching YouTube clips, was 2006, Game 3, Darren Lockyer. The interception try, picks it right up off the deck as it skips through and he scores. And that was my first experience of Origin. And it was like, I'm a Queensland fan. This is amazing. Lockie's the greatest player of all time. And my brain was made up at that moment. That's just how it worked out for me. And it can be the same thing. It's just an exciting sport, the other day, or a couple weeks ago, I watched Hull and Warrington in the Challenge Cup, and I watched that semifinal. Man, I tell you what, that was so much fun, and the crowd was going wild, and they were chanting. It was wonderful to see. It was wonderful, and I had an attachment to it because I was watching Beretta Faraimo play. I was cheering for Hull because Beretta Faraimo is American heritage player, so I was cheering for him to win, and they didn't. But I had a great time watching that game and listening to that crowd. And there's no reason why that can't be great in America.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you touched on there, I think, like the Sydney Roosters. Like people are starting to recognise them as a brand because they made the Forbes top 10 richest teams, like in terms of like profit, holdings and turnover. They came in like 4th or 5th, I think, something like that. So like Forbes is a huge brand in itself, and even one of my mates is coming up to me, is like, who are the Sydney Roosters? Can you please explain why they have so much money?
Yeah,
like
it's massive.
They're a huge brand, and bringing in players like Cooper Cronk and James Tedesco is only going to benefit that brand even further.
Oh, 100%. It's just going to continue to grow. It's just going to continue to grow. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah. But I think that's going to call it there, my friend. I will let you get to your Instagram Live, and thank you very much for coming on.
This has been a great time.
Hope you've enjoyed it.
Oh my God, yeah. You know me, I love talking rugby league. So this has been fantastic. And anybody that's listening that's a fan of rugby league, international or local, it doesn't matter, whatever it is. Just thanks for listening, but get behind Red Star Belgrade and support them without a doubt. And Maddie, I love what you're doing, man. Keep it going.
No, much respect to you, man. And also, we will put a link to Rugby League in America, as well as Nate's girlfriend's charity as well that she runs as well. So a little bit of info on that will be coming too. So thank you very much for coming on. We hope you've all enjoyed, and thanks again, Nate.
Yeah, absolutely, brother.